Hello and welcome to Policy Watch, your packed snapshot of the week's biggest business stories, their context, their relevance and impact. I'm Govindraj Ethiraj. Crop damage across the country, Rabi crop about 10.67 million hectares has been damaged. The big questions that are being asked is what does this mean, not just for the farmers whose lives are affected, but also much more fundamental questions about farm income and whether we need some larger solutions to address this problem of exposing or having exposed a large amount of the population to the vagaries of agriculture. I'm joined to discuss this by Sunil Kumar Sinha, Principal Economist at India Ratings and Research, and Dr. Arvind Virmani, former Chief Economic Advisor at the Ministry of Finance. Gentlemen, thank you very much for joining us. Dr. Virmani, let me begin with you. First of all, let's understand the nature of the problem and how bad it is, right? So the revised figures are now saying that 10.67 million hectares of Rabi crop, which is the winter crop, have been damaged. The figure is lower than what was estimated earlier at 18 million, but it's still bad. And this is something that has hit us at a time and place which was least expected.
So, one of the things the Indian bureaucracy did well or does well, I hope still, is to deal with disasters actually. And agriculture, as you just pointed out, we had this periodically problems. So I'm reasonably confident that they'll manage that situation reasonably well. Now, what are the kind of implications? The usual thing, earlier the Rabi crop used to be a very small fraction of the total crop, but it has grown over time, so it's become more important in that sense.
Right. Yeah, but 61
otherwise,
million
I would have
hectares.
said, well, it's not going to make much a difference. But so where is it making a difference? One we've already seen is in terms of short term, which is vegetable prices. But those are basically the short term. We see a blip, but it has potential implications for inflation, as we know. The second part, of course, is we always used to look at the cereal part of it, which actually was seen as a diversification, that more and more of the cereal crop was Rabi compared to Kharif, which is the monsoon crop, and that was seen as a diversification. So again, if we look at it in that context, it is diversified, and of course we have the cereal stock. So I'm not that concerned because we've built up excess stocks. So by and large, I'm an optimist, but of course there will be impact on growth and inflation.
Right. So we'll come to that. Rakesh, what's your assessment of what has happened because of this?
Well, if one looks at...
for instance, on the human side, it's quite drastic because we're seeing farmer suicides jump up in so many states, perhaps, which was not the case earlier, at least in numbers.
Well, see, any crop damage which ultimately impacts the lives of the rural population, and because the risk-taking ability of these farmers are very low, and if the crop damage is substantial, then obviously these are knee-jerk reactions. But nevertheless, they are, and there is a human side to it. So obviously one has to be sensitive to these issues, and one will have to deal with them at a slightly different level. But so far as crop is concerned, even though Rabi is almost, in terms of output, very close to what used to be the Kharif output. Here I guess there will be two kinds of implication. One, the immediate one would be felt on the prices of the fruits and vegetables, which we have already started seeing. The other one is the cereal crops or the pulses. Now, pulses may remain an issue. Cereals may not be because of the stock that we have, and also the government policy in the recent times that it has been intervening in the market and trying to stabilize the prices.
Right. Okay. So the government is responding depending on who you look at. The Uttar Pradesh government has apparently said that 25 to 50% of losses shall be compensated. There are other similar moves by other state governments, and Rajasthan, UP, and Haryana are amongst the worst affected. But Dr. Virmani, is there a different kind of approach that's required to respond to this? Because this is only triggering off and exposing a fundamental weakness in the economy.
Yeah, you see, the basic problem is that agriculture is still the most controlled sector of the economy. We have this old idea which actually the Green Revolution tried to overcome, that agriculture somehow are children, or they can't make economic decisions. We've got to get away from this mindset, that somehow they are less competent economically than everybody else. That is one. And the second is this look, we talk about rural-urban connection, But we know from history that the whole point of development earlier used to be, we only used to say a structural change from agriculture to industry, which means a change from rural to urban. I think even those who talk about it really don't take it seriously. So the connectivity issue is talked of only in terms of crops, but connectivity is much more. It's allowing that integration of the rural economy with the agricultural economy. As you know, the 50% of the population is still dependent on agriculture.
Yeah.
But that doesn't mean that they only do agriculture. Even those who are in agriculture, that family will be doing other things. So the whole service sector, etc. And finally, this issue of education, this whole, I'm very keen on the skills mission because it gives them an opportunity to learn the basics of education, but then acquire skills which will be again usable in the wider economy.
Right.
But our way of thinking of it is agriculture is rural and these people are stuck there. What can we do to help them? What you need to do is integrate them with the full economy.
And you raised an interesting point because that's a larger question, right? So we're talking about, let's say, a Make in India, which is more manufacturing intensive. We're talking also about, or looking at a situation where we've got this huge supply of people who are unlikely to continue with agriculture or whose exposure to agriculture will surely come down. And the overall economy may just not have the place for them.
Well, that's the whole point. You've got to first think in those terms. I mean, the first time this happened, as people have mentioned, it was during PM Vajpayee's time, where this whole push for roads. I mean, economists like me have known for long and talked about that the best public good is roads. But for many, many decades, we really didn't think of it that way. They didn't think it's important for habitations in the rural areas to be connected. It's the biggest driver of growth. So infrastructure, we now talk a lot about it, but it's basically connecting them and making them a part of the overall economy.
Right, and dispersion. So, Sunil, let me come back to the other point, right? So, if we are, as we solve this problem, and again, I mean, and there are going to be other future sort of occurrences as well. There is one part of it is to do perhaps with climate change, right, which is a different discussion. The other is to do with our response to it. So should we be responding in a financial way, which is to compensate farmers who are hit? Should we be looking at better and more innovative ways of crop insurance? Or is there some other way which fundamentally, resolves the issue for the farmers when the problem happens rather than much later?
Well, it's not an easy solution. I mean, in my view, it is not going to be easy. But again, always compensating the farmers in terms of waiving off the loans, etc., I don't think is the solution, because that sends a different kind of a signal. On the other hand, a crop insurance has also grown over a period of time, but it is still not something on which the farmers can really rely on. So it has to be a mix of both the the market instruments, so to say, which can help farmers in terms of firstly taking the risk, and secondly, if the risk somewhere goes haywire, then how to kind of mitigate those. So it needs a combination of both of.
The insurance problem, you got to remember, insurance works when some people are affected, others are not, right? It's a pooling of risk. Now the problem we have, we worked on this for years and years. The problem which arises is that when you have this kind of an occasion, you get everybody is affected in that area. So people, and the people understand, and it's not viable, So for example, peanut crop in the old days, I remember, I don't know what the situation now is in Gujarat and Rajasthan, people wouldn't buy it because it became too expensive. The premium, I forget, was 15 or 20%. Nobody wants to pay that kind of premium. It just, when it happens, there is no cross pooling, So insurance, of course, is the way to go. How to implement it has been a big problem. Maybe the government has tried to do too much of it by itself. Maybe it needs to get the private sector interested, maybe even subsidize it for a while to get the thing going.
So if you were to look at a 2 or 3 stage response to a problem that is clearly going to recur and going to affect lives, what would they be? And let me begin with you, Rakesh.
Yeah, that's what I said. I mean, the response.
So when I say 2 or 3 stage, it could also be chronological.
Yeah, so I mean, see, to begin with, I mean, as it has been in the case of several other government initiatives, that you begin with the help of the state, but subsequently you involve the private players, and then you try to develop a mechanism which ultimately acquires some kind of a self-sustaining.
So when you say private players, you mean from a financing and insurance point of view?
Insurance perspective, yes. I mean, they have to be brought into this whole issue. And you see, if you send a signal that every time there is a crop loss, there will be a farm loan waiver or government will pay out the doles. I mean, then the risk taking or risk solution mechanism on the part of the farmers would not develop. By this, I'm not saying that they don't need support. They do need, but some mix of it has to be evolved so that some bit is borne by the government, some bit is borne by the farmers.
Right.
Then only there will be a response which is going to be viable.
Right. So, Dr. Virmani, the same question, and let me add another one to that. Is there the urgency that you need or we ought to be looking at in this area?
Yeah. So, the part we haven't discussed so far is the policies. You know, the policy structure, as I mentioned, I think that agriculture is the most heavily controlled area. We need to start decontrolling. We've had this argument for ages that livelihood depends, etc., etc. But at some point, you have to start the change. And I made this very clear to the PM and FM 10 years ago, my last year in government, that you got to start the process. So there is this whole import-export policy, which was very random and arbitrary. I saw from inside, which didn't ever benefit the farmers, though everything we do is in the interest of farmers. There is the whole question of reforming the subsidy system to go from what we call subsidies to transfers, because the former are distorting. The third part of it is the states. So you'll recall in the budget there is a statement that the Niti Aayog will get everybody together. There are also opposing states. For a long time, the so-called surplus states, again, we are talking only of cereals, and the deficit states had opposing views. So there is a lot to discuss, but there is also this issue of changing, introducing modern technology. We are too stuck in the cereals mindset.
So therefore the question that kind of emerges from all of this is anyone thinking about this?
Yes, I think this process of discussion of policy is what is announced in the budget, and they have to take it forward.
What I mean is something more fundamental. I'm saying the climate is changing, the vagaries of weather are changing, the kind of impact that we might see could be exponentially higher than what we are seeing today, and for which we cannot be prepared beyond a point. So how do we respond to this? And we're talking about impact on agriculture, lives, people, incomes.
In the old days, every 5 years, we used to set up in the Planning Commission a group to look at these things. Now, we are not clear about the Niti structure, but yes, at some point, I mean, they could decide tomorrow and say, okay, we'll have a special task force on all these things. Perhaps that would be one way.
That would be one way. Rakesh, what's the way forward? I mean, how do we draw attention to the larger problem and find the immediate fixes too?
Well, I mean, in my view, as Dr. Virmani was saying, I mean, one clear-cut thing that needs to be done is that one has to think differently than what has been thinking about agriculture. I mean, in the sense that today, when you look at the rural economy and agriculture are no longer synonymous.
Yes.
Let's be very clear about it. I mean, there are studies which have shown clearly that in few cases 1/3 and in few cases even more than 1/3 of the rural income is actually non-agricultural income. Now, if that is the new reality, then one has to really think differently about agriculture. And as Dr. Virmani was saying, that to believe that farmers are not able to take decisions in their interest is also a wrong way of thinking. Somewhere we have to trust them, somewhere we need to give them more freedom in terms of choice, options and marketing of their produce, and accordingly prepare the policy prescription.
Right. So as we conclude, Dr. Virmani, so one step in the short term and one step in the long term, in your mind, what could it be? Or what could they be?
The short term we discussed, the government will have to take care of the immediate problem. That's always true. People...
And is that, no, so my question in that, is it a financial solution which is...
Yeah, from the center it's always financial, it goes to the states have to do. There's no way, because the administrative machinery is all at the state level. You can't define, we talked about one size fits all, it's just not possible. So the usual way is a team goes from the center, it investigates and...
So you're saying compensate people for losses?
So that obviously has to be done now.
Compensate people for losses
to the
up to some
extent it's a big loss. Usually it's not done for small cases, etc. That's what the teams judge. And the second part is the reform process. We must not keep treating agriculture as if it's like an egg, which is going to break. It is not going to break. For 50 years we made that argument. We've refused to proceed forward. We talked about the same old solution. I often mention this report of the committee. It is this big. It lists all the problems and the old conventional ways of solving it. And we keep talking about the same thing. So we need to have a different approach. And as we kind of discussed, perhaps one way is, maybe we are right for setting up a new task force which now, given all the changes, may have a different approach.
And which looks at the future and is sort of future-proofs this larger challenge that we have. We've run out of time. Thank you very much, Dr. Veermani and Rakesh, for joining us. We're going to a break. On the other side, we're going to look at the new Goods and Services Tax Committee that's coming into place, and things seem to be moving. We find out how much with Amit Bhagat, partner indirect tax at PwC. Stay with us. Welcome back to Policy Watch. Kerala Finance Minister K.M. Mani has taken over as the chairman of the Empowered Committee of State Finance Ministers on Goods and Service Tax. That's another step in the forward direction when it comes to GST. The big question now is, are things falling into place? If not, what else needs to be done? To discuss that, I'm joined by Amit Bhagat, partner indirect tax at PwC. Amit, thank you very much for joining us. So tell us, things are moving along. There is a deadline, however, which is April 1st, 2016. How do you see things as they stand today? And also given the little passage of time that we've had since the union budget of 2015 and now?
Okay, there are two parts to this. Of course, we do see a lot of activity, a lot of talk around GST. There's a lot of excitement also in the industry. If you talk to the government, they're extremely optimistic. And one can see the optimistic manner in which the FM has been driving this. So, which is a very positive sign. Then we've seen the negotiations with the state has happened at a breakneck speed. Certain things have been doled out to the states just as a give and take so that they come on board and support this. I mean, this is a great transformation in tax and very much required, as we all know. So having said all that, I mean, there are gaps. If you ask me that, have we moved enough? I would say, I would be a little reluctant in giving a very kind of...
a 10 on 10.
Yes. So while there is a lot of, the intent is very clear, the efforts are very clear, but when we look at the ground level announcements or specifics, those are lacking. I mean, yes, the FM did make a statement, and perhaps 10 times during his budget speech he would have referred to GST, but there were no concrete announcements or a roadmap as to how we are going to go about it. So, of course, we have a deadline of 1st April.
Could the government be waiting till the bill is passed and then...
Yeah, I think that is the precursor to anything that would happen really effectively. So once this constitutional amendment bill is passed, I would think then the ball starts rolling quite fast. And then, of course, I wouldn't be surprised if it's rolled out by 1st April 2016 or a little later, maybe a quarter later.
So the bill is, of course, is a different discussion, and that's more political, though it's very critical here. You said that, you know, things have moved forward at a breakneck speed when it comes to negotiating with states and I guess setting the rates. Any hurdles that you've noticed or roadblocks that might emerge later?
See, of course, that's a very big question. So the states, of course, not the center wants to lose revenue on account of this new tax regime. So the rate that is being talked about today is about, which is called the revenue neutral rate, which simply means that the states or the center should not lose any revenue if that rate is applied. Now that rate is currently pegged at about 27%, which is extremely high. And it is higher than perhaps the current incidence of taxes. So that certainly would not be welcomed by the industry. I don't think it will be productive. It may be counterproductive. I mean, people would not want to comply. So all that apart, so I would think the realistic rate should be around 20% combined rate. And but if you want a perfect GST, and the the special committee of 13 finance, they said a rate of 12%, 5% for the center and 7% for the states. Now that is a very idealistic perfect model, but we shouldn't expect that. So somewhere around 20% rate should be okay. And if you say what hurdles, of course this is a negotiation. So I would think rate is not so much a negotiation, but the compensation that the states want is a bigger question. And on that front, the FM has been quite forthcoming. The allocation has been made of 33,000 crores to be dispensed over the next 3 years. So I think the states should come on board.
Okay. Right. So, and what's moved well? Okay, so assuming if these are some of the hurdles, but what are the bright sparks, if any, or the highlights?
No, okay, two things that I could think of is that a lot of work is happening in the background in terms of both the legislative infrastructure and the IT infrastructure. And IT infrastructure, I think, is absolutely pivotal to the launch and management and efficiency of this entire tax regime. Without it, it would just collapse.
Yeah.
Now, on that front, a special purpose vehicle called the GST network has been formed, which is a public-private partnership. It's a joint venture. So, which is the nodal or central company, which is a service provider to both the states and the government and to the assessees. So, this will be like a central infrastructure, IT infrastructure, where everyone does its filings, provides information, and they would...
So it's almost like an exchange. It's netting off and then
it's like a proper exchange, absolutely. Yeah. And that will be a data bank of everything. And it's one point compliance portal. So on that front, based on our knowledge, they're very confident that they will be ready for launch on 1st April or before that. So that's one good aspect. Okay. Another thing is that various committees, subcommittees have been formed to legislate or to draft laws around the mechanics or the rules or the various provisions. So these two things are happening, and a lot of work has gone there. The third thing is that we also see a lot of cooperation from the states. A lot of states are now coming on board, but of course there's some politics around it. Keeping the politics aside, I think these are the three areas where we moved quite fast, and there seems to be quite preparedness to launch it. Okay. But for this constitutional amendment, of course.
Right. Okay. So you said the joint venture which will handle and function like an exchange to manage all the data and everything. So that obviously should be ready before the 2016 deadline. Does it look feasible from what you understand?
So from our interactions with this particular entity, we believe they are quite confident.
Okay.
And they have done some tests also, so I think they would be ready.
Okay. So if I were to ask you a slightly larger indirect tax question, I mean, the budget did leave some question marks on our current excise duty and structure. So do we need to move faster on some of those things and sort things out before, or rather balance things out before we come to GST, or are we on path?
See, I think various aspects of this budget indicate towards a alignment with the GST, or kind of preparing one for the GST regime. One is the tax rate increase for service tax. Now, a sudden increase from 12% to 14%, or 12.36 rather to 14%, is a move towards the GST rate, which is expected to be for services around 16%. And if you include this Swachh Bharat cess, which is 2%, you are actually going from 12 to 16%. So that's a clear indication of a move towards the GST rate. So that's one. Now, so I think the other indicators could be like simpler compliances. So there are various small measures, but it shows that the government is trying to achieve the objective of GST.
So you're
gradually.
saying simpler compliance. You're getting a sense that the tax regime
is... it's not something very radical, but some minor indicators here and there. But at least it shows...
So you're saying from the thought approach and intent point of view, the government is moving towards a simpler indirect tax regime in general, and obviously a GST regime, assuming many other things were to...
But to expect too much from the budget vis-a-vis the GST or budgetary changes, I don't think that's possible.
Sure.
Because it's a completely different tax regime. Here you have multiple taxes, multiple agencies. GST is a one tax, one national tax concept. So I don't think budget should have too many indicators in terms of GST.
Right. Amit, we've run out of time. Thank you so much for joining us today. Well, we also, a little while ago, I spoke to the principal economist of the Asian Development Bank, Dr. Guangxia Wan, and I asked him about India's infrastructure deficit. And he had some very interesting answers. He doesn't think India's infrastructure deficit is something to be worried about, but there are other issues that we should be also focusing on. Hear this interview. Hello and welcome. I'm joined by Dr. Guanghua, Principal Economist at the Asian Development Bank. Dr. Guanghua, thank you very much for speaking with us. So we're looking at an interesting economic situation in Asia, particularly China, which was growing in double digits for many decades, has now slowed down to about 7.4 and is likely to go further to 7.2%. Now, what does this mean for Asia in general, if it does, and what does this mean for China itself, and also to what extent is this a conscious attempt at throttling growth and focusing on environment and bringing about greater balance?
As I said just in this meeting a few minutes ago, China has growing, as you said, double digits, and to me this is not really normal. It's extraordinary. It's a bit abnormal, and moving to 7-8% to me is normal. So it's not really what we call this new normal. It is a normal thing. We're returning to be normal. The implication, of course, is profound because of this globalization, because of the production chain. Many countries in Asia and beyond really rely on China's growth for their own growth. So that certainly have implications. But going 7-8% for the next, say, 15-20 years is also a very ambitious target. And I believe China can maintain that. Now, at the moment, China does face problem. You were asking whether it's a conscientious, decision to slow down, and I believe that is the case. In the last 30 years, China has been growing very fast. It has accumulated wealth, but also has accumulated many problems. And just like a person, who is running very fast, but his health is suffering from some problem, you can continue to run, but it might be a good idea to have a rest, to have a health check, and try to diagnose and cure some of the problems, and including corruption, which China is working very hard, including environmental problem, pollution. Of course, we'll see what the government will do. But one of the three major issues is, apart from corruption and pollution, is inequality. So China, we know that in order to curb inequality, which is the equity issue, sometimes you have to sacrifice growth or efficiency. And China has been doing that, and China has achieved some success. Not many people actually realize China's inequality has been coming down since 2003. Between 2003, 2005, 2006, depending on the statistics and measurement. But in any case, I think it's confirmed inequality has been coming down, and that has a lot of implications for China's growth, which of course will have implications for other countries. If they can solve the inequality problem in China, China will continue to grow and will make the growth sustainable. And that, of course, will have implications for this region and those countries out of the region.
Well, that's all we have time for on Policy Watch this week. We'll be back next week, same time. Thanks for watching.